Batein, and joining me today for the conversation is my friend Shrishti Bajpai. Shrishti has been working for last 5 years in Kalpavriksha, which is a 40-year-old environment action group in Pune. Shrishti is a young researcher, activist who is passionate about documenting stories of hope and transformations that offer varied pathways out of the current crisis and towards well-being. Her close association with environment and justice issues has led her to advocate for rights of rivers in India. She was born and brought up in Kanpur, a city that thrives on the bank of river Ganga. Yet Ganga is the most polluted in Kanpur. As Shrishti says that this is possibly the trigger of her reason to work for rights of rivers, as the contradiction of the most revered river being most polluted disturbs her deeply. Shashi is today going to share with us about rights of rivers, what it means for rivers to have rights, and can this really save our rivers? So, hi Shrishti, I'll welcome you to the first episode of Hone Do Baatein, and I'm glad that finally we are having this conversation and that you could take out time once again for, for me and for this episode. So, I would like you to share about what this whole thing about rights of river is, and help us and help me as a very layman person to understand this whole concept of rivers having rights as person. And while we are having the conversation, I'll also have some questions that personally I would like to have some clarifications on. um, and I'll for until then I'll give this whole platform to you to help us understand this whole concept.
Thank you, Neetu, and thank you for bringing me for the first call. Hone Do Baate sounds very informal, so I don't know how informal I can make rights of rivers. We'll try. So, just to give you all a, a brief background about why we are talking about rights of rivers in India. So, in 2017, March 30th and March 22nd, when in a week's time, the Uttarakhand High Court came up with two orders recognizing the rights of river Ganga, Yamuna, as that of a living being. So what does that really mean? It basically means like the way you and I have a right to live. Similarly, Ganga and Yamuna have a right to live. And the court very interestingly also wrote that all the glaciers, the rivulets, the dales, the forests, the catchment areas, all those species inside the river, tributaries, distributaries, everything has a right to live, exist and persist. So this sort of opened up a very new debate in India. Rights of rivers, or broadly rights of nature, is a sort of a new movement that is emerging across the world. The movement has its roots in legal language, probably 2 decades old. But in terms of cosmologies and spiritual connections, goes back to centuries. And when I say that it goes back to centuries, I'm trying to say that many indigenous communities who have been living with the rest of nature have held that reverence for the rest of nature. There are so many beliefs of how nature is not just a resource, but it's a being. It's a living being. So I'll give you an example of a community in India, Dongriya Kuns, who live in Odisha, and they, when fought for their rights to save Niyam Raja is a hill, but their their idea of protecting Niyam Raja was not because Niyam Raja is because this is a forest that we depend on, but it is much more broader because Niyam Raja is a being. It is a living thing in its own self, and we are part of that living being. So if that hill, that forest is destroyed, we are destroyed. So that sort of a connection with the rest of nature, with the forest, with the birds, with the mountains or the hills or the water is what is sort of a cosmological belief that I was trying to talk about, which has been held for centuries. Another example of this cosmological connection is the Standing Rock movement that happened in America in 2017, which was basically about that you cannot build a pipeline through our mountains and in our rivers because the river is a living being for us. And we will not let that river being diverted or dammed or polluted. So these are the cosmologies that have run for thousands of years, and that is how humans have related to nature. But of course, in the midway, that sort of a connection has been lost because of what modernity and the development paradigm that most of us in the world have adopted. So rights of nature is sort of a movement that is trying to challenge that way of looking at nature through extractive mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And the formal legal idea was given by somebody called Christopher Stone in 1972 when he argued that why can't trees have a legal standing? Just like corporations have legal standing and they are considered living beings, why can't trees be considered living beings? Why can't they have legal standing? Okay. And what does legal standing mean? It means that if I have a legal standing in the court of law, that means my injury can be recognized, I can sue and can be sued, and the damages and compensation can be paid. So these are the three points for having a legal standing. And so that is what one has to explore, and people are exploring of what it would mean for rivers, for rest of nature, and other aspects.
So basically, Shrishti, you were trying to say that this is not a thing which is very recent. It was like you mentioned. It somebody talked about it back in 1972, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this thing is quite old, and you're also suggesting that rights and all is a very new term. It was something which has been in practice, since decades and centuries. All right. Okay. So I was just going through the paper that you had written, which was very beautifully written. It talks about the latest orders which was passed by the Uttarakhand High Court and some orders in New Zealand, and it talks about rights of river as river being a person. So I wanted to understand how can a river with no voice of its own ensure such rights or ask for compensatory actions. And I think these are beautiful questions that you have also sort of mentioned in your paper. And while reading through that, the questions that came to me were, how is rights of river different from human rights or rights of nature? And if you could also talk on that.
Okay, so I also wanted to briefly mention that the rights of rivers in India has a background wherein many countries across the world have recognized rights of nature. So just to briefly mention that Ecuador, a Latin American country, in 2008 recognized rights of nature in their constitution. And then there have been several ordinances passed in US recognizing rights of nature. And there have been UN has a harmony with nature resolution passed. So Bolivia and so many countries have done that. Why specifically New Zealand is to be mentioned here is because the Uttarakhand High Court sort of gives this judgment a week later, the New Zealand judgment. And the difference between, the New Zealand order, the New Zealand Act and the judgment by Uttarakhand High Court is precisely this, that the New Zealand, that is the TV Awa Tupa Act, was passed in the parliament, which makes it a legislature, which recognizes the river Wanganui and its ecosystem as a living person and gives the status of a legal personhood. And so considerable parts of that judgment are simply copy pasted by the Uttarakhand High Court here in India. What you were asking about how can a river have a right? How can it be a person? So if we look at these two judgments, when we look at Wanganui River judgment, we see that what the Crown, which is the New Zealand government, is trying to evoke is this, that indigenous community, which is the Iwi community in New Zealand, has had a long struggle of around 150 years against the colonizers, who have sort of disconnected forcefully people from their communities, from their rivers, from their cultures and traditions. So the Crown, which is the government, recognizes that these are the mistakes done by us, and we are trying to undo those mistakes by recognizing how local people relate to nature, bringing in their cosmologies and their traditions into the legal system. Now, the problem one has to understand is that legal system is not the end, it's not the answer, but it is the first step. So we are looking at rights of nature or rights of rivers as a first step. So it recognizes the rights of rivers or the Wanganui River and its ecosystem basically from that perspective. Now, it is in total contrast with how engineers, how people who build dams on the rivers look at rivers, which is basically measuring it in cubic meters or treating it as a water resource that can be harnessed to generate energy, to feed humans, and that. Okay. So the first change happens there, and recognizing it as a legal personhood status. So there are two, if I may briefly mention, there are two fractions in that. There's one fraction who believes that, well, there are a lot of spiritual governance sort of cosmologies among many communities who treat the rest of nature as a being, which is likely saying that, oh well, you can't see these beings, but they reside in the forest, in the hills, in the rivers. Very similar to, say, suppose how we look at Ganga, and Ganga is a being for us, and it's not just a river. So bringing in that cosmology into the legal practices, so legal personhood is fine. Whereas some people are saying when you associate the personhood status to a natural entity, what you're basically doing is that you are attributing what a person is to a natural entity. Whereas natural entities, a river doesn't behave like a human, and it's very different from a human, and possibly the rights of a river are very different from that of a human.
Absolutely.
So, if suppose we say that the river has a right to flow, then what is the duty of the river? I can't kill you, but when the river floods, can we sue the river because it has flooded? We can't do that. So basically, some people are also arguing why not recognize the rights of rivers or basically natural elements based on what and who they are, understanding their own ecological functions and defining rights according to that.
Okay.
Yeah. And what was the second part of your question?
About how is this the fundamental right of river, how is this different from rights of nature or human rights per se, like why is this totally different, and why can't
I
it?
don't.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, completely.
Like, why can't it be just clubbed as a part of nature, or because river is something that humans are dependent on, then why is it not just a part of or a sub part of human rights somewhere? I mean, I don't know if this is a very stupid question to even ask. If you could also throw some light on that.
No, it's not a stupid question to ask. It's not a conversation or a discourse that is happening in a limelight. So these are obvious questions, and not all of us understand the law. Even I don't understand the law in that deeper way. But in any
Okay.
case, what you're asking is something that I can answer. So, rights of rivers is part of rights of nature discourse. Now,
Okay.
rights of nature discourse is a much broader discourse. Nature is everything. Whereas rights of rivers, or say suppose rights of a national park, which is what again New Zealand did, where they recognized the rights of the Urewara, which was a national park. Earlier, a territory that was governed by the indigenous people and was spiritually very sacred to them. So basically, but because national parks are sort of a modern idea of protecting nature, um, to undo that sort of a process, the rights of people and communities were recognized. Yes, what you say about human rights and rights of nature is a very important point, actually. Why is it important is that sometimes when conservationists or environment enthusiasts think about nature, they think of nature as something that is separate from humans. So,
Okay.
we have to protect tigers, but the community living along that tiger reserve can be thrown out. So that is a problem, right? So that is why I've been stressing on the rest of nature. Humans are part of nature. We are nature. And so this fragmentation that humans and nature is different, that is what is at the crux of the problem. And so when we are recognizing the rights of rivers, the subsistence base, the livelihood, the basic livelihood, subsistence, and customary rights of the people living along that natural entity have to be protected and have to be
Okay.
looked in unison with the rights of rivers. Because if that is not done, then it will become just any other law which the state and the government can use to actually displace people and take over these lands and forests. So that is something that we have to be careful about, of how human rights and rights of people dependent on those natural entities are taken into consideration. And they are part of that decision making process. And henceforth, for any such law or legislation to be recognized, it is very important that we have a more broader imagination of the sort of governance systems that we want to have. A sort of governance system that we have where we don't focus on the lowest level of a Gram Sabha or a village to be able to take decision of what happens in their village is not is will have to be something that is part of rights of demo. So it cannot be devoid of the kind of democracy we want and what kind of political systems we want.
Okay. Okay. You also somewhere in the article you had mentioned healthy relationship, between human and river, which is a natural entity. So and the whole idea of how rights of river will not put an end to human activities like fishing and other activities in the river, and how it will basically uh, sort of it will push for a healthy relationship that should be maintained between rivers and humans. But It is a question that I have as to how do we visualize this relationship? What do we understand by healthy relationship? Because given the economic growth, the way humans have been progressing with respect to the amount of consumption, etc., etc., how do we see this relationship to become healthy now? Like, if you could talk more about that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So first of all, I would like to say that any such movement has to be holistic. We cannot just talk about rights of rivers without criticizing the sort of a development and economic growth model that we have. Mm-hmm. Because we have to get away with the models that have resulted into the deprivation and devastation of nature. And that is precisely what the current development model and economic growth model has done. And we can see it even more starkly now in the times of COVID. I mean, it's not something that you and I don't know. We can see it all around us. So the model that sort of promised for well-being of large majority of people has failed in its promise. It has not been able to provide for basic needs for a large majority of people. It has only served a few. So we have to get away from this model, which has basically made us lose our connection to nature, people like you and I, and is forcing in a violent form, if I may say, the communities who are still dependent on nature to devoid them of that connection. And that is what we have to protect now. Mm-hmm. So how we maintain that healthy relationship? So Neetu, my answer to that is this, that healthy relationship will be maintained when we take in consideration of how people in various parts of the country are protecting that healthy relationship, are maintaining that healthy relationship. What can we learn and what we can imbibe through those processes. Now, I'll give you one example of a healthy relationship among many indigenous and Adivasi communities in India. And also across the world, but India will be more specific for us to understand the context. You would know that many Adivasi communities would do hunting, right?
Yeah.
But there are also many communities, and I'm not trying to say that the hunting that has happened has not led to the decrease in the number of many animals found in the forest. Yes, it has done. But it has multiple reasons of why that has happened. And it has the reasons rooted in colonialism and top-down bureaucracy that the Indian state post-independence followed. But that keeping aside, I'll tell you some examples of how communities try to maintain a healthy relationship when they're dependent on the rest of nature. So, for example, when they fish, so they have rules for fishing. Okay, they will not ever fish a fish that is pregnant, or the seasons when the fish, breed. So that you don't kill the population, because their lives and livelihoods and subsistence depends on maintaining a relationship, a sort of a, if in crude terms one can say that the population of a fish is to be maintained for me to be able to eat it, right? If I kill everything, but then how will I eat it? So in that way, there's a sort of a relationship that is maintained. Now there's also a community in Maharashtra, Kasefardis, who used to kill birds. Okay. But they have hunting rules as precise as that you cannot kill a bird that is pregnant, you cannot catch a newborn, you cannot catch a female. These are the rules that maintain that sort of a balance. Okay. It's when the outside forces come that the balance gets, haywire, and then there's no balance. And when there's a pressure so much from the outside that you don't ever know how to maintain the balance. So you eventually start forgetting. So that is why I was stressing at why customary laws which people have developed over many generations of being in interaction with the rest of nature must be taken into account when we are thinking about rights of rivers. It cannot be entirely a few activists like me or some others sitting in a office and thinking about it, or a government official. It has to be very comprehensive exercise so that we are able to take in a lot of community processes and communities' ways of working or relating with nature into something like rights of rivers. If it doesn't do that, it will be a flawed law. So first, yes, the economic growth and development model has to be staunchly challenged. Second is that you have to bring in customary laws, spiritual governance followed by communities into this practice.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. So it just raises another question in my head as to does this mean that protecting the rivers is the responsibility or the accountability of the people who are not living in the urban areas, and it is the responsibility of the more tribal or the rural people, and the ones who are in the urban cities are the ones who can just take benefits of somebody protecting the rivers, or fighting for the rights of rivers. And the other question that also sort of I just have this when you said that the growth model has to be challenged. How do we see that happening in this modern era where we have drowned in this whole capitalism? We have progressed so much in this whole state of the state of being is totally drenched in consumerism and the monetary system that has been created. So how do we do that? Challenge the existing growth model to ensure that natural entities are also protected.
Yeah. And so your first question, about the responsibility, I don't think so. Any of us can be devoid of the responsibility that we have towards the nature that we live around. But the thing is that we like, say, suppose I live in Pune city, right? There are 5 rivers in Pune. All of them have become literally a drain, and we
Correct.
get water in Pune city from nearby areas. So
Correct.
this tells how deeply distorted are basically our connections with 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 whatever rivers or nature or whatever is around us. Okay, so we are not concerned about a river that is around us, but we are concerned about, oh, that hill where I go for trekking once in the weekend, I must make sure that that is fine. So I'm not saying that that is not fine. Of course, you have to protect that, and so you have to protect your river. So none of us can be devoid of responsibility. In fact, people who are in the cities have even bigger responsibility than people who are dependent on, who are people who are already in a sort of a unison with nature. Why we have more responsibility is that because in some ways we have been part of the destruction. With the kind of lifestyles we have adopted, with the kind of things that we do, we are part of destruction. And so we have to act as a defender for them. So whenever there's an attack on a community that is trying to protect a forest, and like right now it's happening in Arunachal Pradesh, where in Dibang Valley, and a 3,200 megawatt of a hydroelectric project is proposed on 2 tributaries. Now, it's the kind of massive destruction that is going to take. Why can't we stand with the people, with the community there, and say that this is not right? And in fact, to show that that is what is happening. Many people from across India, many young student activists are actually strongly resisting against this process. And some amazing art have emerged out of, because we are all locked down, so there can't be physical protests. The amazing art has come out of this protest online. So what I'm saying is this, that we have even more responsibility, that we who have lost a connection with nature, who probably now live in, concrete buildings and hardly see rivers, hardly see birds, hardly see trees around, have even more responsibility to help defend the communities who are increasingly getting threatened by new projects and new ways of environment or exploitation.
Right.
Now, the second part of your question, which is much bigger question of how do we move towards a non-capitalist or non-extractive economic growth sort of a model. So I wouldn't claim to say that I have any concrete answer, because I can't have. There are many people who are looking for the answer. And people are still struggling. But what I can say is that as we may be forced to believe that the capitalist and this sort of economic growth model has been here for centuries, that is not the case. It has been just 100 years old since the time Industrial Revolution took its shape. So probably 100, maximum 150 years old. And there are still several communities. Okay, in specific context for India, it developed when the colonial rulers came in, and then the independent Indian state also adopted the same model. So even for India, for India specifically, it is not more than 100 years old. And having said that, there are several communities still who do not abide by the capitalist model, who probably are still working or trying to work with less dependence on the capitalist model. So how can we, bring them out, or talk about them, talk about their beliefs, talk about their economic, political structure. So we have to strengthen them and basically convey that there are multiple ways of being. There are multiple ways of relating with the world, and there's not just one that the capitalist system tells us that you have to be part of the capitalist system. It's just not part of life. Okay, that is one aspect of life, but there are many other aspects. There's a gift culture. There's so much different ways of organizing your experience. So we need to talk more about that. And when we start giving, like what is happening right now in times of COVID, is this when it's very difficult to not slip into the current scenario. Because it has also shown how fractured our economic systems and
absolutely.
And so it has revealed that how important it is for people to be locally self-reliant.
Absolutely.
Based on their food, on their livelihoods, on their water, on their everything.
Yeah.
And how can we bring in those examples, those processes more at the forefront? And say that there are people who are already doing that. They need to be protected, and we need to learn from them to be able to do it in our own spaces.
Right. Absolutely. Great. So, the part of the whole piece that was written, the one that really held me was, and I would definitely want you to talk more about that for our listeners, is the part where you mentioned that how eventually these rights are beyond the law, and it has there has to be some extension to other non-human objects, and how helping us move towards a society which is more concerned about moral considerations, and how this whole thing about value should be associated to human community, to not just the human community but also the entire earth, and how the transformation that will happen is will be slow and gradual. So the thing about how we need to bring major transformation in the consciousness and the value system that we have in the action of people who are living along these rivers and using them, which includes also the people who live in the cities, far away from the rivers. Um, but just because it's not in our close proximity, we don't really bother to think about what is happening to the rivers. So the thing about going beyond law, the thing about thinking about being more conscious about uh, things that we are using our nature. So if you could speak more about that.
Yeah. So as I was saying earlier also, rights of rivers shouldn't be seen as an answer to the crisis. It is the opening to the answer. And so that is very important for us to have in mind, because I remember this year when I was at Tata Institute, students sort of felt that, oh, so rights of rivers is going to solve all the problems. And they felt that it can't solve all the problems. And I said, yes, it cannot solve all the problems, but I'm not asking you to think it as an answer to all the problems. It is a beginning to find the answers and to change the discourse which we have followed. And so I would like to also mention that the Indian law discourse has shown some examples of ecocentric laws, which basically means evoking a sense of connection of nature, respecting nature for its own, rather than looking at human needs as the first priority. So let's take that in mind, but they are very, say, suppose judge specific, which is also the case with the Uttarakhand judgment. It is one judge of Uttarakhand High Court was given me several judgments on rights of rivers and also recognizing the rights of the entire animal kingdom. Sorry, I forgot to mention. So these are certain aspects. But what we have to move towards, as I was saying, is towards something that is beyond rights of rivers, beyond rights of nature, beyond rights in any way. Because when we recognize rights of, say, suppose a black person, what are we saying? That rights give a sort of a way in law that you can approach the court of law when you are injured and say that this is not safe. You can be protected by certain legal systems. But it is never case until the society changes. As we can see right now, until the society changes its consciousness of respecting others in the ways that they are, we will not be able to really get away from the ills of the society. So yes, the conscious change in the ways we look at rest of nature requires a very long process, and it's not going to happen so easily. So how do we bring in back the discourse wherein when we say that we treat river Ganga as a goddess, what does it really mean? How do I think about that? Is a mother who can absolve all my problems and so I can keep sowing whatever I want to sow in the river? How do I change that discourse? It requires a lot of campaigning, a lot of processes, a lot of really changing the way the education is done. You are into education, and I think that is where the main role of all these discourses lie. How do we tell our children, like what we were taught in schools and colleges was a very different way. We were not taught environment science like this. We were taught it in a way that you see nature as something separate. We don't have ways of inculcating among children a new sense of awe, paying attention to the nature, to things that are around us. How many of us would really know 10 species of trees or birds, but we might know, say, suppose 10 brands of clothes or cars or whatever. So, this sort of thinking has to change, and that's where many parts of living societies have to work towards. So there's education, there's more campaigning, there's more legal systems understanding into how something like this can be implemented. We have not spoken much about that, but there's also lots of complications about how a right of rivers can be implemented not just in India. So I just want to give you a short update also that this against this judgment, the Uttarakhand state went to the Supreme Court saying that this is a bizarre judgment and it cannot be implemented. We want straight away a stay on this order. And so the Supreme Court gave stay on the order. So we have to also resolve the question of how do we implement a law like this, which will be a big question within because see, suppose Ganga doesn't just flow in Uttarakhand, right? It flows from UP to Bengal to Arabian Sea.
Right.
So then the three states have to work together, and for the river like Indus, three countries have to work together: China, India, and Pakistan.
Absolutely.
So how do we? So many aspects of that is required. So what I'm trying to convey is that there's one level of lots of hashing and lots of rehashing of many aspects of this law that need to be understood in terms of how it can be implemented. And then there's another level where a lot of people have to contribute of how it can reach to people, to common people like you and I, and we can rekindle in our memories of what it is to be near a river bank or in a forest, and which doesn't need to be in one of the Himalayan states, but it can be around anywhere. It can be in Pune, and how can I protect that and let it live? So, so that's what has to be done. And there is also an idea which came. So basically, there was also a dialogue organized this year in March, early March, so before coronavirus lockdown happened, of South Asian level, basically including Pakistan, Nepal, but we couldn't get friends from Pakistan, of course, and from other places. But we only got people from Nepal, and then some people from Bangladesh joined us. And so there were a lot of discussions about what it means to protect rights of rivers in the South Asian level. And one of the things that emerged out of it is just how do we reach out to students? How do we reach out to new people to engineering graduates, to water institute students who are taught about management and water management? How do we reach out to them? And how do we use creatives like art to convey this message? So there's a lot of also thinking of how do we include it in curriculum, and so a lot of things about that. Yeah.
Right. Great. I think that will be a brilliant way to sort of put this in front of larger mass, and definitely with respect to if it is something which is introduced in the curriculum to specific students who are studying about water management, etc., and also in the schools in really early grades, because those are the children who are sort of going to grow up and become the citizens who will definitely have to take part in this whole thing of maintaining the rights of river and taking care of the natural entities. Great. I think this was a wonderful talk. It was quite enlightening for me, Shrishti, and I would definitely want our listeners to also sort of give it a thought about this whole thing and see in their individual capacity what is it that they can contribute towards ensuring how we behave towards our natural entities, river being one of them. Uh, any last note from your end for our listeners, Shrishti? Anything that you would want them to sort of be with and think about and gradually put in their actions?
Yeah, maybe. So first of all, thank you for this first for opening your session with my thoughts. But I just want to say that it's not really that you need a big change to bring about change. You need to do it, and all of us need to do it in small and little ways in our everyday life. So how do we ensure that we use organic washing, products, so that ultimately what goes in the river is not so polluted and it's not
Right.
the chemical stuff, So let's start thinking about ways and means. Sometimes I know that there's a strong word. What can I do right now to, change things? Because I also feel that all the time. So
Right.
the small acts of everyday life are very important to bring about the larger things. And that is what I have personally learned from so many communities that I've worked with, is that you have to do it in everyday life, in the ways we live, that we have to bring about change for that meta change to happen. So let's
Right.
begin being conscious of what we do every day, and that's where our work begins.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Great. Thank you, Shristi. Thank you so much for coming for this whole thing. I hope our listeners enjoyed this conversation and they put a lot of things into actions gradually. Um, we had Shrishti Bajpayee, and she gave us really thoughtful, ideas about how we can bring change in our daily lives. I would once again thanks Shrishti and all the work that she has done with so many communities. I wish our listeners enjoyed this whole talk, and we will definitely want to hear from you about the talk. Thanks a lot.